real, raw, radically unscripted, the almost daily ZenCast. Listened to in 20 plus countries around the world with a quickly growing audience. We're here to talk about the stuff that everyone shies away from on public discourse in the social media sphere. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's kick things off with a little bit of music from DJ Zed. Here's a fresh, hot track right off of the animatronic Cyborg Discotheque Synthetica press label, Alchemical Android Anthro, from the unreleased album The Future Was Yesterday. On today's episode, theorizing in the theoretical about theories. That's right, folks. We're going to revisit the core thesis, the serious questions at the center of the nougaty, gooey collection of theoretical thoughts I've been contemplating for the last 30 years about the wildly popular conspiracy theory content spectrum of nonsensical theories that don't make any sense. Alright, I apologize. That comes off as a bit dismissive. I'm not preemptively dismissive about conspiracy theory content. And we'll get into all those delicious details in just a hot second. Please enjoy the rest of this track while I brace myself at the beginning of this episode. In a live-to-tape performance, it's DJ Zed, fictional sidekick and imaginary friend of mine, and character in a book series you haven't read yet. Playing for you, engineering for you, a Tech Step DMB 101 live-to-take, remix live engineering performance of audio loop assets. For more information on DJ Zed and our many adventures in the Zeppoverse, please head on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. All right, friends, before we begin, for clarity, for those of you who are new, joining the audience of this podcast for the very first time, hello and welcome, namaste. I am an imaginary character from a book series trapped here in your very real world environment, commenting on it with my very authentic opinions. Don't let the fictional sidebar business get in the way of understanding that what I'm about to say is legitimate, real, authentic, raw. Ooh, wow, I kind of merged three words together and didn't know what I was saying. Real, raw, and radically unscripted. No one is paying me to say what I say on this podcast. In fact, this podcast has cost me more money than it's made me in the last 6 years. Although, hopefully, knock on wood, we are now just over the halfway mark of our overnight success story, which, as anyone who knows anything knows, always takes 10 years. So thank you for joining us. It is my humble pleasure to share with you my real, raw, radically unscripted thoughts about your crazy bonkers world that I am stranded in. Okay, friends. First, before we dive into the theory about theories, let me give you a little bit of context. The following is real. It's not fictional, okay? I may sometimes pretend or reference my fictional literary character verse because I'm cross-promoting my book series here on my podcast. But that doesn't mean that I'm fabricating the context, the thoughts, the reactions to the world at large. Here's my context. I started asking questions about theology, organized religion, and religious dogma at the radically unexpected early age of 6. Questions that the people who were supposedly trained thoroughly enough to be teaching this shit to me could not answer or didn't want to answer. I engaged with online political discourse at the age of, I think, 8.5, 9. I've been using the internet here in your universe, in your timeline, on your planet, since the year of our Lord, 1988. What were you doing back in 1988, dear listener? Well, let me tell you, I was having conversations with people that swore up and down that they knew the absolute truth, and then asking them questions about this conspiracy theory content, absolute truthiness that they so fervently believed in. Questions, you can guess it, that they either did not know how to answer or refused to answer for reasons that they didn't want to get into. The questions that I've been asking for well over 30 some odd years, 30 plus, 35, 36, 37, 38. God, are we hitting 40 years already since I don't even know. How many years ago was 1988? Somebody do the math. The questions I've been asking have been serious ones. Questions I want actual answers to. And the conversations that have unfolded because of the kinds of questions that I've been asking have led me through a series of observations, through many years of honest, open-minded, intellectual contemplation with a willingness to follow the facts where they may lead. I've come to the beginnings of a thesis or a theory of my own, which I will tell you right now, quite curiously, the conspiracy theory community doesn't want to do anything with, doesn't want to think about it, doesn't want to investigate it, doesn't want to research it. Self-proclaimed conspiracy theory researchers and supposed free thinkers have told me to shut up and sit down because I didn't know what I was talking about. And it's quite the remarkable pattern. For 30 plus some odd years, nearly 40 years, there is this pattern of people telling me that they know the absolute truth about a subject. Me asking questions in response to those claims, them referencing evidence which comes from the same content that they were quoting from when they claimed to know the absolute truth. And then usually a series of, then a series of falling down the slippery slope of confrontationalism. In other words, I would keep asking them questions about this circular loop of content that they're referencing, which they claim to be the absolute truth, and their responses would devolve from referencing the same content again to obvious triggery behavior, reactionary confrontationalism, insults, expletives, very colorful adjectives, and downright personal threats. Like straight up like, oh, they started threatening me because I dared to have the cajones big enough to look them in the eye metaphorically or literally, because I have had these kinds of conversations face to face in person, restaurants and bars and waiting for the bus, etc. And instead of engaging in open-minded, critical thinking, and the exchange of ideas, they get hyper-defensive and straight up rhetorically violent. If not like, they just jump right to intimidation tactics, which in my mind does not help prove anyone's argument in the positive. If a person is proposing an idea and when questions come their way, they quickly devolve into intimidation tactics, in my mind, in my book, from my experience, that's a big, stinky, massive, rotten red flag. But I digress. Let's back it up. I want to clarify a few things so that people don't go and project onto me pure nonsense. And funny thing is, even in trying to do so, I get projected on. But I want to put this down for the record. I have never dismissed out of hand the idea, the possibility, the reality that corruption exists in the world, that people in power tend to become corrupt, that people in power that have been corrupted tend to seek out others of a similar ilk with which to conspire in order to collect, acquire, retain, hoard more power, more wealth, more control. Never have I ever said, that doesn't happen. That's just a conspiracy theory. Never. I'm not that naive, folks. And yet, that's one of the first malarkey, baloney, bullshit, topsy-turvy, you're not listening, you're just yelling at me, projections that people will axiomatically, knee-jerkedly, pre-programmedly project onto me. If that's one of your first reactions to me asking you questions, then I have a hard time believing that you are truly applying critical thinking to any of what's being discussed. Because that, dear friends, is obvious us versus them defense antagonistic tactic programming behavior. If you can't handle the heat of a few questions about the subject matter that you are proposing is absolute truth, then it makes the rest of us feel, those of us who are honestly interested in exploring ideas and are willing to update our analysis based on the facts that become available, it makes us wonder if you've even attempted that process in regards to the content that you're propagating and defending. Okay? So, I don't dismiss things. I don't say to someone, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. I never have and I never will. So don't accuse me of that, because that only makes you look really silly. All right, friends? Just making that clear, because guess what? That happens to me 3-4 times a week. It's quite the curious conundrum of behavior patterns that people don't want to acknowledge about themselves. Now, I'm not trying to berate or belittle or judge anyone. I'm calling this out because there's meaningful significance to it. So along that vein, and I'm saying this again as a disclaimer for the record so that no one can then attack me and say that I do this, because I'm clarifying for you right now, to the best of my understanding and my awareness of my own personal history in engaging in public discourse, both on social media and in real life, I haven't done it. I don't pejoratively use the term conspiracy theorist against those I disagree with. That's not what I do. If you see me use the term conspiracy theorist, you very well likely will see the term or the phrasing before it, self-proclaimed. All right? Now, maybe people don't understand what that means. That means I'm not calling them a conspiracy theorist. That means They called themselves a conspiracy theorist. So when I say, when I make a statement about conspiracy theorists or conspiracy theory researchers, I am referencing people who have, in my direct experience, during our conversations, chosen to label themselves that. And I'm not passing any judgment. I'm just referencing them as the self-identifier. Those are them pronouns. Conspiracy theory researchers are some people's chosen pronouns. To borrow a term and twist it upside down and poke a little at those who are offended by pronouns. So there's that, okay? And I want to make that perfectly clear. I don't go around belittling people for what they are doing, especially if they are labeling themselves that way. I'm just referencing those people, okay? All right. No matter how many times people have accused me of this kind of stuff falsely, I have never done these things. And this is the final one. I have never denied and have I already said this on this episode? I apologize. I feel like I say this 5 times a day because people keep coming at me. People literally come at me who have been following me on social media for more than, a couple of weeks or a couple months and say, so you don't believe that conspiracies happen at all, do you? And I'm like, wow, you don't read any of the things that I write, do you? Because I've never said that. I've never denied that conspiracies happen. In fact, I like to point them out sometimes when they're obvious and the conspiracy theory community doesn't seem to be giving a flying fart about them. For example, what Trump did during the 2020 election was conspire with the people around him while he was in power in an attempt to preserve and maintain that position of power beyond the scope of the typical mechanisms by which we transfer that power over to someone else. Now, here's another thing that needs to be clarified. Just because I criticize one group, one statement, one idea, a conspiracy theory, does not mean I am axiomatically, automatically, blindly defending whatever the antithesis is. If I'm poking at Trump, it doesn't mean I'm a hardcore, blind believer in Biden. It's funny how many people accuse me of that. Right off the bat, without bothering to do a little due diligence and comprehend my perspective, comprehend the message I'm trying to convey. People don't engage with each other for comprehension very much anymore. And this is a tragic pattern that is heavy in conspiracy theory community. Self-identified, self-proclaimed conspiracy theorists seem to have an observable tendency of scanning other people's claims for trigger words and then overreacting to those trigger words, most often with a collection of kind of obvious to identify prefab talking points that are obviously part of the content that they are promoting. All of that is big red flag territory. You can't label yourself a free thinker and then regurgitate prefabricated talking points and then demand that others sit down and shut up and stop talking and stop asking you questions. That's not how free thinking works, friends. That's not how critical analysis functions, my dearies. So, check yourself before you wreck yourself on those points. Okay, we're going to take a queek? Wow, my pronunciation is really sliding all over the place. I think I must be, in literary terms, I must be near some sort of transitional portal to another timeline where the dialects are all a little different because it's all bleeding over. But that's just me referencing my science fiction, action, adventure, conspiracy theory book series. which you might be interested in reading the preview chapters for. All of them available free for you to read at your own pace over at wattpad.com. You can find that link without having to overthink it by going to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Going to take a tiny break, and then we're going to get to the meat of the discussion for this episode, theoretical theories about theoretical theories. Right back at you in just a moment. If you appreciate the Discotheque Synthetica, literary fictional robot rock dance music featured on this podcast, please head on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo and click through to the SoundCloud link to enjoy the latest and the greatest releases. Getting ready to drop a new mini album called The Future Was Yesterday. You're currently listening to Gravitas Grammatica, a Gravity live-to-tape, remix live audio loop asset engineering performance, recorded live and without editing to permanent record tape o-meter. I'm trying to come up with fun names and labels for stuff as we build the world of DJ Zed. But come on down, check out the music whenever you get a chance. As we dive back into the discussion, I just want to highlight my favorite meme of the week from the social media madness of memes. There's one that's going around. It's an image of scissors, and they look like little either medical scissors or those kind of cuticle scissors. So they're not like standard scissors. They're really thin and really awkward, the kind you would not cut paper with. So it's kind of extra hilarious to me because they aren't like standard paper scissors. They're not crafting scissors. But the meme reads, "Here are some scissors so you can crop your effing memes." I only edit the F-bomb out because I'm trying to minimize my need to label the show as adult because I think that's limiting my audience exposure. But I digress. Hey, shout out to whoever made that meme. I love it. My response to that, of course, being the snarky snarkerton that I am, the app is called Instasize. It's a real app. It's awesome. It's free to use. And it makes that whole problem of how do you crop the awkwardly shaped image into a perfect square without losing the image that you want to share, makes it all go away. It's called Instasize. It's free to use on both Apple and Android marketplaces. And I am amazed at how many self-proclaimed meme lords don't know what it is or how to use it. And no, friends, the InstaSize app is not paying me to promote it. That's just a genuine response to the meme. It's hilarious, I think. I digress, friends. Welcome back. Thank you, DJ Zed. I love that track. Sorry I'm talking all over it. For those of you who want to hear it without my voice, soundcloud.com. You can find the link at solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Okay, so conspiracy theory content. The track's not quite over yet. Sorry, DJ Zed. I thought we were almost there. Dear friends, are you familiar with the ancient saying, the word is not the thing? If you've never heard of it, if you've never heard that phrase before, please do take some time to contemplate it. The word is not the thing. Or to put it in slightly different terms, the label is not the object labeled. The conspiracy theory content is not the actual conspiracy. Dun dun dun. What? Some people might find themselves a little mind blown by that notion. Here's what I'm trying to say, my dear audience. I've been fascinated by conspiracy theory content for a very long time. Trust me, I understand its appeal. I get it why people think it's fun and hot and trendy to make memes about jumping down rabbit holes. I've also, in my 30 years plus, I'm reluctant to say 40 years, but I think it's been more than 40 years now, or at least it's about to be 40 years. I'm not one to keep calculated tabulations of every little widget in my life, every little factoid. But let's just round it up and say 40 years. 40 years I have spent reviewing conspiracy theory content. No, I don't have a bibliography. I wasn't expecting to be demanded one at this point in my life. But I have, in all earnestness, genuinely attempted to give the benefit of the doubt whenever conspiracy theory claims are made. In part because it's obvious that a lot of the horrible things in our history were indeed, powerful people, kings, politicians, clergy from organized religion, conspiring behind closed doors under the cover of bullshit and smoke screens, cloak and dagger, smoke and mirrors, cover-ups, and flat-out manipulation and lies in order to achieve their own insane, hubris-driven goals. I don't deny that. Hello? Have you met the human species? Even when it was vocalizing that I'm sorry, we don't have historical records from that, and I can't make claims about having observed that myself. Human nature is a wild and wonky thing. And as I've pointed out before on this show, and I probably will be forced to point out 1,000 times again, it is no monolith of one thing or the other. No individual human being is a pure absolutist monolith of evil or good. Even the best examples of the kindest people have, those folks have flaws. And even the worst of the worst, who are reviled for their acts throughout history, they also had their soft spots, their gooey centers of emotion for those that they care about, etc. Y'all humans. Okay. So 35, 36, 37, some odd, 30 or 40 years of engaging in conspiracy theory content. And there are some patterns I've noticed, which have prompted me to ask some questions. I'm going to read off for you some of the questions I recently exemplified for someone on social media in a discussion about conspiracy theory and the way the normies get dismissive about it because they don't want to contend with it. And I don't use that term pejoratively either. I'm referencing the term that conspiracy theorists will use to identify those who are not a member of their community. Whether they use it pejoratively in a dismissive, judgmental way is a different issue. But your average everyday folks, either too busy living their lives, trying to make ends meet, until they get sucked into some rabbit hole that seduces them on very personal terms. Right? And then they start engaging with the content and whatnot. But when looked at from the broadest possible perspective, friends, conspiracy theory content and its impact on those who buy into it hook, line, and sinker, to borrow a term someone recently used against me, you'll notice this emergent set of patterns. And to point it out to people, I ask some of the following questions. These are just examples of the kinds of questions I ask. I don't always ask them in the same wording or in the same fashion. Sometimes completely different questions come to my mind that are driving at the same ideas. So bear with me, but here we go. One of my most central questions, and this has it's an observation that goes all the way back to the beginning, okay? When Ronald Reagan was in office, I was actively engaging in internet public discourse and encountering people making claims that I needed to ask questions about. And this is one of the first big ones. And I asked it differently back then. And I'm asking it in this form now because of technical terminology that has become commonly understood. Okay. So, why is it that so much, not every single piece of conspiracy theory content, but so much of it is riddled with obvious neurolinguistic us versus them conditioning and manipulation? Why is that? If conspiracy theory content, and mind you, let me be clear, I'm very well aware that one of the largest, most commonly shared themes in all conspiracy theory content, independent of whatever particular subject matter the content may be focusing on, that one of the most commonly widespread themes is that all you sheeple over there have been manipulated by us versus them neurolinguistic programming. So that's why I find it so bizarre that any piece of content that's making an accusation like that should also, quite curiously, be riddled itself with us versus them neurolinguistic programming. But this is the trend that I see and have seen consistently for nearly 40 years. Why does conspiracy theory content rely so heavily on the dehumanization and hyper-vilification of whatever targeted group it is criticizing. Whether it's conspiracy theory content about LGBTQ community, whether it's conspiracy theory content about minorities, whether it's conspiracy theory content about lizard people in government, like why? I mean, let's start right there. The government, this government, that government, all governments are secretly run, operated, and controlled by lizard people. Now, even though it includes the word people in it, that is dehumanization in action right there. That is the most obvious example of dehumanizing a targeted individual or group. And the fascinating thing is they claim that there's a preponderance of evidence, but no one's brought it forth in any meaningful way to hold these people to account. And then, of course, still, that's a different question. And there's a whole series of counter arguments there when I ask that question. And we'll get to that question. But let's take these first two questions into deep consideration. Conspiracy theory content about whatever you want, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the moon landing, whether it's who is truly in control of the ongoing current events of the world, whether it's, it rarely matters. And I'm sure there are exceptions. I don't deal in absolutist, maximalist, monolithic thinking. But it's really hard to find a piece of conspiracy theory content that is truly free of neurolinguistic manipulative coding that relies on us versus them conditioning and that is empowered by the hyper dehumanization and hyper vilification of those being supposedly exposed. You can hold a greedy, tyrannical, abusive, oppressive politician or king or leader to account without stooping to dehumanization and hypervilification of that person. There's no need. The human being is perfectly capable of being so greedy, so filled with avarice, so high on their own hubris that they will do horrible things to other people. There's no need to also insist on accusing them of being robots from another planet or lizard peoples from the caves in the center of the earth. Especially when those exaggerated claims are next to impossible to verify in any way, shape, or form. You'll note that almost all the evidence provided in such cases is circular logical in its nature. They are these evil, horrible things because they're ugly and they do evil, horrible things. I've literally seen people justify their accusing someone of not being a human being because of the lack of beauty in their face. So anyone who's unfortunate enough to be born with an ugly mug is automatically a lizard person from Mars? How does that make any actual sense? And then, how many politicians, how many members of an elite community or of an elite level of industry have been accused of such things, and then nothing gets done about it? If George Soros is an evil, baby-eating, blood-drinking, demon fucking... I keep dropping F-bombs. Erase. If he is all these horrible things, why is it so impossible to prove that? Let's say, like in a court of law. Please do note, that actual conspiring groups of people, aka the most recent example, Team Trump, people who are actually caught up in conspiring to hoard or acquire more wealth or control or power, will wildly accuse their opposition, their critics, and anyone who's trying to hold them accountable of being the worst of the worst. But when it comes to proving that in a court of law, they will waffle, they will collapse like a spineless flan in a cupboard, to borrow way too many different references from way too many different stand-up comedians. I was going with an Eddie Izzard thing, but he's no longer popular anymore. She's no longer popular anymore because she's a member of the trans community. But Eddie Izzard, wow, talk about the George Carlin of our times. If you haven't seen Dressed to Kill, and no one's paying me to endorse that. That's just a great piece of stand-up comedy and should be available on HBO Max and isn't for some reason. What the F, HBO Max? But I digress. So, obvious neurolinguistic programming coupled with the hypervilification of whoever is being supposedly exposed, right? Standard protocol. Standard. It's almost default. I don't want to make a monolithic absolutist claim that absolutely all conspiracy theory has this in it, because then I would be, falling into my own fallacy. But an awful lot of it, the most popular, it's right there. It's right there in the language. So, why? Why is that, friends? What purpose does it serve? If this content is the absolute truth, it should not have to rely on the tools and tactics of liars. That's my point. No one wants to hear that out. No one wants to talk about that. Moving on. There always seems to be multiple conflicting variations of the same subject of conspiracy theory content. My most recent example, which by the way, I called out in real time on this show as it was developing 3 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, is the massive cornucopia, the overwhelming amount of conspiracy theory content that emerged in rapid pace during the first 3 months of the pandemic. I lost count at over 45. So 45, 46 different, sometimes somewhat similar, but often wildly contradictory conspiracy theories about, quote unquote, what was really going on. Ranging from they're trying to turn us all into cyborgs, to they're trying to literally kill us all, to all kinds of wild and wacky things in between. And that's just one example. Another one that I love asking people about is when they insist that the New World Order is in charge of things and trying to destroy us all. Okay, but which New World Order? The Talking Dolphins New World Order? The robots from another timeline New World Order? The aliens from a nearby planet New World Order? The demons from the pits of hell New World Order? The it's all led by actually Satan New World Order? There's a lot of New World Order theories, and they're not all congruent and tidy and compact and interrelated and making sense with each other. But no one wants to talk about that in the conspiracy theory community. When I point that out, I get attacked and accused of being a conspirator, and I get accused of being things I'm not, and I get dehumanized and vilified. Is that how free thinking? Is that how intellectual discourse? Is that how research is done? Is that how... it doesn't seem to me that that's how any of those things are supposed to work. Why does conspiracy theory content deal in absolutes so often? I've been talking about it all episode, and I've said this before on the show, and I'll say it again as often as is necessary. The human species is not absolutist and monolithic in its actual form and function. It is intellectual laziness to point fingers and accuse massive swaths of people in absolutist monolithic terms. It is a methodology divorced from reality. And there's a reason why it's used. Because once you start thinking in blind faith, axiomatic, monolithic, absolutist terms, nuance is ignored. Exceptions to the rule rejected. Evidence denied. Because one props oneself up with the assertion that they're dealing in the absolute truth. Therefore, their accusations, which are monolithic and absolutist in their terms, must also be absolute truth. Let me tell you something about the universe you live in, dear friends. Nothing in this universe is absolutist. The universe, at its very building blocks, is relativistic in nature. Up and down are not absolute cardinal directions. They are relative to the individual experiencing them. Already talked about that before on the show. I'm sure we'll have to talk about it again. It's a pin on the corkboard. If you're not familiar with the pin on the corkboard, friends, brace yourselves, strap yourselves in, get a notepad, and start jotting things down as you listen to the show. There is a figurative mental corkboard hanging up and to the left of my left. It would be your right, I suppose, if you were watching me from an audience perspective. But it's a little corkboard, you know, straight out of that meme with the guy waving his arms in the air, explaining things, and there's pieces of paper pinned up everywhere and red string connecting it all. It's my version of that. As you listen to this show, as you travel back in time, and I humbly invite you, friends, if you're new to this audience, please don't just ignore these 6 years of content we've got here. Please take a deep dive. Scroll down to the bottom of the playlist and jump around. You don't have to do it all in order. You don't have to do it all in a binge straight from the beginning to the end. Jump around, catch the titles that appeal to you. Some episodes reference other episodes, so stay tuned for that. But join the effort of connecting the dots for yourself. I reference the corkboard as a way to remind each other and ourselves what we've talked about before. I also don't have I have a physical corkboard in my room, but I do not have things pinned to it. It's actually blank, and that's an artistic choice. It's sort of, isn't that funny? He's referencing that corkboard, but there's nothing on it. But mentally, intellectually, in your mind, or on a piece of paper, if you are the kind of person that needs to jot it down, I humbly encourage you and invite you to jot down the things that are pins on the corkboard, and then connect the dots as you travel through all the various episodes, backwards in time, and of course forwards in time, as new episodes drop. Okay. So absolutist terms, why are we dealing with that so much in conspiracy theory content when the universe does not work in absolutist methods? It's an open challenge. Bring to my attention something that you can prove is absolute in its form and function. The obvious, easy, knee-jerk response people come at me with is truth. And then I respond with, oh, really? Truth is absolute? Okay, from which angle? And I share with them the meme about the difference between things that are true, things that are the truth, and reality. If you don't know that meme, come on over to the social media platform for the show over on Facebook, the Almost Daily ZenCast page on Facebook. It's part of the meme collection there, I believe. And this is one of those things that rubs conspiracy theory community members the wrong way. The only absolute truth is that there is no absolute truth. You know who peddles in absolute truth? Organized religion. And multiple pins on the corkboard. There are reasons, many of them, profoundly serious reasons, to doubt the dogma of organized religion. Not going to get into it now because, like I said, we've talked about it before and we'll talk about it again. Off the top of my head, an episode that you might want to go hop over to if you've never heard it before is Belief, entitled, it's an episode I did a while back called On the Form and Function and Absence of Belief, or something to that effect. Go check it out. So another question that I have, and I've got several more, I might run out of time, I've already gone on way longer than I meant to. Why does conspiracy theory content seem so often to lead the people who believe in it towards violence as the only viable solution to the defined problem? That's the biggest red flag and red herring of them all. It's one of the most common mechanisms of motivation in conspiracy theory content. They're going to kill us all, so we must rise up and butcher them first. That is pure. Down that path is madness, friends. Because combined with the dehumanization and hypervilification of others, and the insistence that everything is absolute monoliths of absoluteness, you get caught in the cul-de-sac of, I don't care what anyone thinks, I'm going to kill them all because I believe they're going to kill me first. And that kind of paranoid delusional thinking leads to human atrocities. Human atrocities that solve absolutely nothing. Please do explain to me what has been solved by any of the nonsense bullshit wars. And it's funny to me because you'll literally hear from people who at some point in their conspiracy theory rabbit hole journey talk about the war profiteers and get mad about that and point fingers at them and say, ooh, how dare they profiteer on war. And then a little bit later turn around and say, ooh, you know what we should do? We should do a war. Let's do a war. I'm sorry, folks, but this is one of the biggest facepalm moments of conspiracy theory content that I cannot believe just keeps thriving. That whole absolutely silly notion of fighting fire with fire is only true in terms of preventing a forest fire from spreading around much further in acreage. And guess what? It has a propensity of backfiring on us. In terms of human activity, fighting fire with fire is bupkis. You cannot end a war by waging war. You will only perpetuate the psychological, emotional, and spiritual trauma that leads to the corruption that causes wars in the first place. So why does so much conspiracy theory content depend so heavily on driving people towards believing in violence as the only viable solution to the defined problem, which is often, not always, but often hyperbolic or entirely made up? No one wants to answer that question in the conspiracy theory community. In fact, their most common response to that is to threaten me with violence when I ask that question. Things that make you go, If that isn't one of the biggest red flags, I don't know what is. Conspiracy theory content, as we know it today in our postmodern, post-technological, post-internet world, has been growing in popularity for over 60 years here in these grand old United States of America. All right? And of course, never have I ever denied that some of the content accurately describes real things that have happened or are going on. In fact, I am quite fond of, and habitually I'm often pointing out to people that yes, conspiracy theory will indeed use real facts and or nuggets of facts and or slivers of truth. And then they will wrap it up in increasingly implausible, hyperbolic, fantastical, paranoia-inducing malarkey. And it relies on the reader being unable to disambiguate, being unable to determine and differentiate the difference between this little horrible thing that's true and these 7 other horrible things that are not true. "60 years it has been doing this conspiracy theory content. 60 years the community around it of believers, a lot of them behaving in a very blind faith, axiomatic, reminds me of how organized religion manipulates people kind of way. And yet, despite the fact that for 60 years this has grown so much, it has become so normalized that the most recent president of the United States is a casual conspiracy theory promoter, but no real world problems have been solved. I haven't seen any real solutions to anything come out of conspiracy theory content, even when they're actually accurately describing a real problem. One of the things that's valid in conspiracy theory content is that much of our world involves toxic stuff. Technology, moderately to highly toxic. Dangerous to the human body. But have we solved that? After 60 years of clutching pearls and freaking out and pointing fingers and accusing people of being Satan worshipers, have we solved the reality that the technology I'm using to communicate to you is also, flooding your space and my space? And I didn't mean to reference the website, but rather, the room I'm sitting in is irradiated by the technology I'm using, and so is yours. Have we solved that? No, not at all. Does the content that claims that 5G is going to kill us all propose an alternative? A solution to the technological reality that radio waves and frequencies like that can indeed be damaging to the human flesh? No, it doesn't. It just whips up its believers into an engineered outrage while they continue to use the technology. I don't know how many people I've had this discussion with, but it's an absurd amount of people out there saying 5G is the devil's work and we're all going to die. Well, then turn off your phone. Stop using it to post on social media all day, every day. But that just pisses them off when I suggest that, right? I'm also old enough to remember when it was 1G and then 2G. That was definitely going to be the cause of the biblical apocalypse, the end of all of human civilization, the death of the human species. And it didn't really do that, did it? Is it problematic? Yes. Is there evidence that cell phone radiation causes cancer? Absolutely. I'm not denying that. Is it unconscionable and immoral that this technology is developed that way and is also addictive in its nature, and that they aren't solving the, oh, by the way, it causes cancer problem? Absolutely. But has any of the conspiracy theory content that has emerged around this issue solved the problem? Hands down, categorically, all caps, no, not at all. And yet people cling to the content like people cling to the Bible. People cling to their preferred conspiracy theory content the way religious zealots cling to corrupt and manipulative religious texts. Is that an interesting coincidence? Or is that by design, perhaps? I don't know. But I'll tell you what, instead of investigating it further, conspiracy theory believers, people who self-describe themselves, who identify themselves as believers in conspiracy theory content, they get triggered AF when I point this out. And instead of applying critical thinking skills and doing a little bit more research in a different direction than the biased direction they'd already been going in, they accuse me of all kinds of insanity and then eventually either tell me to shut up and sit down or start intimating threats of violence. Why, friends, does it seem that conspiracy theory content, given the way it impacts believers' behavior, why does it seem that all of that process, the 60-year history, only benefits those who would be conspiring? I know this one's a little hard for people to follow, but from my perspective, after 30 years of giving it the benefit of the doubt, I don't preemptively dismiss this. I didn't come at this with all of this in mind before I encountered conspiracy theory content. I've come to the conclusions that I'm at right now because of the 30 years of checking it out, attempting it, to think it through, asking the questions that I've asked, and applying critical thinking. The most triggering of statements that I make, and I'm sorry that it triggers people in the conspiracy theory content. I'm not trying to troll them. That's one of the things they like to do. I'm not trying to own the conspiracy theory people. That's one of the things they like to do. I'm asking actual questions that I've come to because of the application of critical thinking. Why does it seem that conspiracy theory content benefits almost exclusively the people it claims to expose? How does it benefit them if that doesn't make any sense to you? Think about this. What did I just say? 60 years of conspiracy theory content becoming more and more popular. A growing community that's gotten larger and larger. Have they solved the problems? Have they held anyone to account? No. They spend their days spewing talking points online and at family gatherings. They get caught up in endless, intractable argumentation with people who cannot bend the knee intellectually to the content that they are clinging to. And who does that benefit? It certainly does not benefit the people suffering the real-world impacts of the world's corruption and abuse in any way, shape, or form. It only seems to benefit those who are in power and ought to be held accountable for the horrible things that they do, but somehow continue to get away with it. Why do people who label themselves quote-unquote conspiracy theory researchers seem to be primarily doing the following: reposting content that they found or were spoon-fed using corporate algorithms, content they didn't write themselves. On this show, friends, every word is my own. No one told me to say it, and I checked myself for unnecessary influence from outside sources. I question myself before I go on the air. If I'm wrong about something, and I am corrected with verifiable, undeniable evidence, I will update my assessment, because I'm not clinging to anything blindly. I'm not thinking in absolutist, monolithic terms. I am reporting my real-world, lived experience, observations, and the thoughts that I have come to think because of those observations. So it's fascinating to me. People who label themselves a label that includes the word research quite often, not all of them, some of them take the idea of, amateur research to deep ends, and actually do try to do research. And yeah, there's a lot of horrible things out there that have been going on. And yeah, sometimes that is a part of the package in a conspiracy theory content. You'll notice, dear friends, please note, for the record, I have not in this episode, and I don't think I ever have in the history of this podcast, and I don't believe I have in the history of my engaging in this public discourse since the very first time I logged onto the internet way back in 1988 or 1987. Never have I dismissed, in absolutist monolithic terms, all conspiracy theory content as purely false. But guess what? Who does do that sort of thing? People wrapped up in conspiracy theory content. Depending on who's being targeted, all legacy media news is fake news. But, for all the corruptions and all the problematic issues in any particular media company, that statement doesn't stand up. Sure, they'll omit stuff. Yes, there are problematic issues. Of course, we need to reverse some of the bizarre political decisions that have been made about regulation over media outlets. I'm not denying any of that. But I am pointing out that that monolithic absolutist claims are rarely monolithically absolutely true. So, friends, all of these questions must be asked over and over and over again until the human beings that are wrapped up in blind faith, belief in conspiracy theory actually engage in critical thinking and questioning of the content they're so attached to. And so my final question is, isn't it funny that they get all triggered? One must wonder, why do members of the conspiracy theory community get so triggered when anyone dares to question their beloved conspiracy theory content? People who run around waving the banner of question everything will freak the F out and lose their proverbial poo when you dare to question their favorite content. It's wild. And it's a self-reinforcing loop of divorcing the idea of critical thinking from the concrete reality of critical thinking. Someone who keeps patting themselves on the back over and over again and asserting that they are a critical thinker but are not actually engaged in the act of critical thinking will blindly believe that they've applied critical thinking techniques when they have not. That's how neurolinguistic manipulation works, dear friends. In my humble opinion, all of these and the other broader range of questions that I bring to the table when discussing conspiracy theory content with those who self-identify as members of the conspiracy theory community, which, it's curious, those people will turn around and deny that there is such a community, even though they share memes in common and are constantly high-fiving each other and patting themselves on the back for being conspiracy theorists or conspiracy researchers. It must be investigated why the community cannot allow people outside of the community to question the ideology of that community, especially given the evidence that it is not even one cohesive, well-organized ideology. It is a cornucopia, a chaotic patchwork of all kinds of different content, of all kinds of different ideological constructs, all mishmashed together. The reality that these kinds of questions trigger reactions of dismissal, ridicule, mockery, insults, expletives, sidestepping, and ultimately threats of violence. It is the central problematic issue, the biggest of the red flags, and the primary reason why, even when a conspiracy theory, a particular one, is accurate about, there are plenty of conspiracy theories that aren't even really conspiracy theories. They're just the vilification of something that's going on. Right? Like, one of the ones that I found really curious and hilarious was the conspiracy theory about the engineering of neural connectivity to technology. They haven't hidden that. The scientific community and the technological industries involved in those areas of investigation have been quite open about it, because they want to present it as a potential solution to many tragic limitations caused by accidents or disease to the human body, right? For example, the evolution of artificial limbs from static, plastic, uncomfortable things that just barely get the job done and allow someone who is missing a limb to approach some sense of normalcy, to these high-tech, 3D printed, articulated, robotic hands that can be controlled through neurobiological impulses. This has not been hidden from the world. It doesn't qualify as an actual quote-unquote conspiracy theory because there's been no cover-up. But conspiracy theorists will not bother to contemplate that aspect of it, right? The content is just the vilification of that innovation. And of course, any piece of technology can be used for stupid, horrible things. Duh. You don't need aliens from outer space or lizard people for that to happen. It's not formal. I haven't even written it out, but my working conspiracy theory about conspiracy theory content is simple. The vast plurality, if not the majority of it, is authored, created, curated, designed, engineered, distributed, published, and delivered to the conspiracy theory community by those conspiring, because it acts as a distractionary smoke shield of engineered wedge issue, endless argumentation, and has allowed those actually in power, actually riddled with corruption, actually engaging in horrible, stupid, evil things, to continue to get away with it. Because the world is wound up in the argumentation about the theories instead of the legitimate investigation, exposure, and holding to account of those in power, riddled with corruption, doing horrible things. And here's the penultimate irony. It's not lost on me at all, this irony, that the self-proclaimed conspiracy theory research community blindly rejects my theory when I share it with them. Now, I haven't gone to the length of formalizing a big giant dissertation and creating a website, but I often have conversations when I get to this point and say to them, here's a theory you might want to do some research on. blindly rejected. They can't be bothered. People who claim to do all the research themselves, and I'm making bunny ears and quotes up in the air, right? I'm making air quote bunny ear things. People who claim to personally verify every piece of evidence in a given conspiracy theory that they are promoting and that they are insisting that I consume cannot be bothered, and categorically reject to even contemplate the thesis of my very simple conspiracy theory about conspiracy theory content. Now, I'm not alone in my position. I'm not some lone crazy kook. There are plenty of people out there like me who, after a period of time of applying critical thinking and giving conspiracy theory content a chance to turn out to be true, come to the conclusion like, wow, this stuff is wild, crazy, seductive, addictive, manipulative, and seems to only benefit the people it claims to expose. Therefore, it makes the most sense that they're the ones creating and distributing it. But because the conspiracy theory community is so adamant, so caught up in their faith in the content they've already attached themselves to. And by the way, here's a question that wasn't on my list. Why does so much conspiracy theory content engender a personal identification in those who believe it? Why are people's personal identities wrapped up in conspiracy theory content? That right there is religious indoctrination manipulation 101. So why is it happening in conspiracy theory content, which claims to be the absolute truth about what's really going on? Oh, just like organized religions claim, despite none of their claims jiving with reality. Dear friends, I humbly invite you to contemplate these questions and think critically for yourself. Don't accept any of the statements I make on blind faith. Think them through. Ask more questions. Investigate to the best of your ability. And come to your own conclusions. And I invite you to engage in that public discourse with me and others by heading on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo and adding me in all the different social media platforms that you are active on so we can discuss this and all the other subjects and pins on the corkboard from this show out there in social media. As always, friends, thank you for tuning in. Here's Recalibrating the Perfect Tape, the perfect take, a live-to-tape performance of mid-tempo digital assets from Remix Live, engineered and performed improvisationally for your audio pleasure by my imaginary friend and literary sidekick, DJ Zed. Don't take my word for it, friends. Go and do your own analysis. You, too, will find that most, not all, most conspiracy theory content is usually a mix of some facts, some slivers of truth, wrapped up in hyperbolic, fear-based, neuro-linguistic programming. Us versus them, conditioning, and hyper-vilification of your fellow human beings. And friends, if you understand that, and if you realize that, and if you look for yourself and find that to be an accurate description, then I humbly invite you in joining me in asking these kinds of questions to those in your social media spheres that are still clinging to conspiracy theory content. Yes, there are problems in this world. Yes, there are corrupt leaders, religious leaders, political leaders, military leaders, cultural leaders. Yes, there is a church of Satan worshiping. But hey, religious freedom. Yes, there are people who do horrible things to other people. And those things must be accurately identified, correctly exposed for what they actually are, and not what they hyperbolically or fear-mongered to be, and held to account. And we can do that. But first, we have to lift the blinders of these engineered wedge issues so that everyone else can see clearly the manipulation involved, so that we can actually identify the real people. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Most of the people who are the face of evil in conspiracy theory content are just the fall guys, the front men put out there to be obsessed over. Whether or not they are actually corrupt is a separate question. Some of them are. Who knows? Some of them might not actually be. So, friends, always question the content being peddled. Remember to think outside of the box that is defined by the content. And here's a little deep, dark secret about the reality of this universe you live in. There is no box at all to begin with. Please stay tuned for future episodes. Here's a few of the titles and or thematic ideas we will be addressing in the not too distant future. Common sense and whether or not it really ever existed. That's one of my favorite subjects of discussion. Where's that list? Okay, here's the following is a list of episodes I intend to do in the not too distant future, starting with that thing about, I need to write that down because it's not on my list. Common sense. Did it ever really exist? I don't want to ruin it. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert. I am of the humble opinion that common sense has never existed and is actually a made-up nonsense term that is used as a form of peer pressure to get people to comply with ideas that they may not be in agreement with, but that other people are vocally demanding and insisting are just common sense. All right. Other titles will include The Metaphysics of Political Ideology, Perception as an Article of Faith, The Duality-Non-Duality Conundrum, The Problematic Issue with Blind Faith Fanaticism, The Importance of Understanding Fractal Algorithmic Recursion in this Probability Waveform Function Universe of ours, The Relativistic Nature of Truth, which no one wants to acknowledge, The Dangers of Continuing to Ignore the Alt-Right Pseudo-Christian White Nationalist Agenda in the Post-Trump Administration Era, The Problematic Issues with Blind Faith Fanaticism, The Importance of Understanding Fractal Algorithmic... Oh, I already read that one. The Importance of Personal and Interpersonal Healing, and the long-ignored scientific evidence that cannabis protects against COVID better than pharmaceutical products, apparently. That one I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do because that requires a sort of scientific authority that I completely lack. Remember, friends, never have I ever pretended to be an expert or an authority in anything. I am just another schmuck with an opinion. But I humbly propose to you that my opinion is not someone else's, is not something I've been programmed with. It is my own, and it is truly the result of an earnest attempt to think my way critically through the winding rabbit hole of rabbit holes and the trends found therein. As always, thank you for listening. I have been your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and this has been an episode of the Almost Daily ZenCast. Here's another little bit of music to play us out. Hold on, let me find a nice, cute, short one. Retro Synth 101 Remix Live to tape, Lessons in Simplicity from the Next Gen album. Thank you for joining us. If you're new, please do hit that follow or subscribe button. Drop a comment and a like and leave your thoughts and questions. Your interaction is strongly encouraged. But please be advised, if all you're going to do is be antagonistic and confrontational with blind, wild accusations and intimations and insinuations of intimidation tactics and or threats of violence, you will be blocked and reported. That nonsense is malarkey and has never solved any problem that the human species faces. Thank you for listening, friends. Namaste. And may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. Now go out there and be good human beings to each other in the real world and in your social media virtual spheres.